special budget workshop meeting of the Princeton Council. Madam Clerk, have we followed all of the requirements for the noticing of this meeting?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you, and can you please call the roll?
Ms. Howard? Ms. Cremiller? Here. Mr. Miller? Here. Mr. Liverman?
Here.
Ms. Butler?
Here.
Mr. Simon?
Here.
Mayor Lempert?
Here. And now please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I'm going to start tonight's meeting with public comment. Is there anybody from the public who'd like to speak on items not on the agenda? Ms. Nemeth? No? Okay. All right, and so now then we'll start with our work session tonight. This is the first of our budget work sessions for 2014. This is something new that we're doing this year, where we're having all of the division heads in to go over some of the major items in their agenda changes from last year, and to walk us through what's there and to allow council to ask questions as well. So we're going to start with Ben Stentz from Recreation. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Lempert. Good evening, everybody. The 2014 recreation budget is relatively straightforward for the most part, with one notable adjustment. That adjustment is that prior to this year, all the operating expenses related to the department itself and the park maintenance functions that recreation covered were all fell under the heading of one operations budget that was recreation. What we decided to do in developing the 2014 budget was to split that into two distinct parts, one being the operations of the department itself, and the second being things that really are specific to parks and playgrounds operations. So while the total dollar amount is very similar, the way it shows in your packet are two different things. The recreation budget, which is the dollar amount of roughly $71,000, and then the parks and playgrounds budget, which is right around $183,000. That number's up a little bit. There was some guesstimates that had to be thrown in at the time we developed this in regards to how much the mowing contract would come in at. We guesstimated at the time at roughly 35% more than last year. It's more like 45 or 50% more, which Evan detailed Monday night to council. So what the shift will show you is that last year's operating budget was around $212,000. This year it shows as $71,000. That difference is made up on the parks and playgrounds side, where last year it was $21,000 and this year it is $183,000. So in the end, that switch is going to make it certainly better for me, and I think for the finance department, for Kathy, and hopefully for council as well, to just have a much clearer picture of where those operational expenses are being directed, rather than lump it all into one big pile as it has been for certainly as many years as I've been around. So,
can I jump in with a question?
yeah, absolutely.
Why does it say recreation and education, and did it say that before? Maybe I just didn't notice in the past, or is that a...
I don't know the answer to that. On page 32 of your packet is where I'm working from, Jenny, which is the...
Oh, of the detailed budget?
Yeah, I mean, they see the total and then it broken down by line.
On the summary, it says, and maybe this is a question for Kathy, it says education, recreation and education, and then human services is under that, and I just wondered if that was a new... Yes? I'm looking at the summary. Okay, you know what, it doesn't matter. Just forget the question because nobody else is looking at that document. Go on.
Okay.
I know what you're looking at, and I think it's just a heading that was in there, and I'm not sure why.
Okay, forget it.
Because we don't have any education in there.
Okay, forget it. No, really, truly.
Yep. A couple points to just consider as we break out the departmental operations versus the Parks and Playgrounds operation is that the department has taken on considerably more responsibility with Parks and Playgrounds in 2014, and some of that actually even started last year as the Recreation Department took on garbage pickup in all the park facilities throughout the consolidated town, which some of which happened through DPW prior to that. So those things all represent more time, more manpower, more resources, whether it's garbage bags, fuel, vehicle maintenance costs. All those things factor into being in more locations, being in those locations more often, and having a much bigger responsibility each day. Prior to consolidation, our responsibilities were that we had maintenance work in between 8 to 10 parks/facilities, and now we're more like 19 or 20. So it really has more than doubled the number of locations that our maintenance staff is getting to every week. And again, that goes back to some of the line items you see for horticultural materials, vehicle repair, which a lot of which we do in-house through our maintenance staff unless we can't solve it. All those things contribute to numbers slowly rising, and it's just the simple math of being in more places, more people, more vehicles, more gas, more supplies, more playground mulch, and on and on and on. So the job has gotten bigger and the budget has gotten slightly bigger, but we work hard to not let the budget grow nearly as fast as the responsibility grows. That's the goal.
Well, and this is a question for Kat. Are we subtracting it from, because in theory, it's not actually more work for the town. It's just your department, right? So are we subtracting it from another area?
We shifted some of the funding from roads, where they have some of their summer help but we didn't shift the entire amount, because the idea was also that with less work over in Public Works, that would kind of free up some of those to get to some of these areas in roads that they haven't been able to before. So it wasn't a dollar for dollar shift, but some of it was shifted over there. So in essence, we are kind of taking on more work a little bit, not because of the parks, but because we had some other areas, some gaps in being able to get some work done in Public Works and in the roads. So hopefully this will free them up to do that.
Okay.
I had a question with the open space line item here. So it looks like there's $80,000. Was that money that used to go to Public Works that's now coming to Rec, or is that new?
No, that's not new. That's always something that we did with the understanding that the work that was done on some of the parks and open space is charged off as maintenance in the open space budget. So, and that's the same amount that we've charged off in other years, or just kind of reallocated to the open space trust.
If it says zero in 2013, that's because...
It's one page earlier. You see the offset.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a question.
And then Jeff. You go first and then Jeff.
Okay, Ben, thank you so much. Can I ask you a question?
You can.
Thank you so much. Under the insurance line item, I noticed that we had it's on it's zero. You haven't allocated any funding, but yet you spent $1,500 or so last year. Is that because insurance has been shifted?
That's actually because we consolidated. So as you remember, Rec used to be a joint agency. So what we did with the joint agencies was we allocated things like insurance and Social Security and those things that can be identified to a particular department, where we have centralized everywhere else. We used to identify it within the individual departments so that we could cost the department appropriately, and that if it was our department that we banked, we could appropriately bill the borough for their share of that. So
okay.
It's really just an accounting move.
Right,
and what we've done is moved all insurances out to one insurance cost center.
Okay. The other question was, under the contractual services agreement, I know that you actually spent $63,000 last year, but this year we only budgeted $6,000. Was that part of the pool amount? I'm just thinking that may have been...
No, the way you can see that, Lance, is that while the number went down significantly in the rec account that you're looking at, further down page 33, where the next section start, which is titled Parks and Playgrounds, if you actually turn to page 34 and look under other contractual expenses or other contractual services, you'll see that that number jumped way up. So in essence, those two numbers offset each other. We've just moved that money to the Parks and Playgrounds because almost every dollar of that contractual services line item literally is for park maintenance services.
Okay.
And so it just seems to be a much cleaner way to show it because that's where we're spending it.
Thank you.
Ms. Butler?
So that's the mowing.
A bulk of it is the mowing. As Evan mentioned, the not-to-exceed number on the mowing for this year is roughly 52 or 53. There's a number of other smaller things included in that, but a bulk of it is mowing, yes.
Also, on the open space issue, I believe what that is also a vestige of the old borough accounting that we used to spend some of our open space tax on park maintenance rather than, is that correct, Bob?
That's right.
And I thought it was the recommendation of the Transition Task Force to either to not do that, so we could get a clear idea of what we're spending on the park maintenance. You know, this sort of confuses the accounting.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the recommendation was to not account for it that way anymore, but it was to account for it, because I think there were some years in there, whether it was in the borough or in the township or both, where it wasn't necessarily easily identifiable or accounted for over in the open space trust. So, but we have a commitment to do that. We have open space in a separate trust, and it's very easily identifiable what is being charged off to the open space. I do know they did talk about it, but I don't think they ever came to a decision or a recommendation that we not utilize open space funds for park maintenance and development, because it is part of the open space ordinance and the referendum. It was it has a wide approach.
You know, I think you're right, but there was a desire to have some clarity to do it.
Yes.
In a way that we could identify how much of the open space money is being spent on maintenance, and also to be able to identify. It also seemed that doing it the old way, we were obscuring how much we were spending in some fashion. So I think you're right.
Mr. Miller?
Ben, in going through this, I see a number of expense code items where there are significant differences between what was spent last year, actual expended in 2013, and the budget request this year. And I think some of those have been addressed in the last couple of minutes, but there are others that pop out. For example, 251, where we had an actual expenditure of $0 in 2013 for motor fuels and budgeted $9,750 for 2014. 254, where we had an actual expenditure of $10,599 for other material and supplies, and we're now budgeting $2,000. And there are a number of others like that as I go through this. And I'm particularly concerned when I see discrepancies between what we actually spent last year and what we're budgeting this year that are 5 or 6 times different. In other words, 5 or 6 to 1 between what we spent last year and what we're budgeting, one way or the other. And I'm wondering if you can kind of walk through those items and just say a couple of words about why the differences are so significant.
I sure can, Bernie. I'm going to leave 251 motor fuels for the end and let either Bob or Kathy take it, because I don't know how the motor fuels get billed. But 254, for example, we budgeted for $10,000 last year, spent just over that, and then the 14 request is knocked way down to $2,000. Much of what we purchased out of that line item, which is things like playground mulch, infield mix for baseball infields, that money is part of a line item number that has increased in the Parks and Playgrounds budget. It may fall under 237, whether it's building supplies, horticulture materials, jumped way up in the Parks and Playgrounds. So anywhere where there's a major difference, either up or down, it is offset, not necessarily dollar for dollar, but for the most part, in the Parks and Playgrounds piece of this, as compared to the actual, recreation office operations. So that's why you see, for example, 254 is way, way down, because we're not going to, outside of park-related things, there's very little other materials and supplies that we need to purchase for the recreation department office function. Again, it's not dollar for dollar everywhere, but that's part of, as I analyzed what we spent last year and tried to anticipate what we're going to spend this year, sometimes the number jumped up a little bit, sometimes it shrunk a little bit from line item to line item, and of course my goal is to hit it on the head, which is a tough thing to do every time. But
Let me ask you about 264 water. I would assume that the pool is a major consumer of water. Last year we budgeted $32,000, we spent $32 and change, and this year we're budgeting $2,500. Are we becoming much more... Sorry.
But Bernie, it's a good question that brings up one other point to keep in mind. While the water number did jump up in the Parks and Playgrounds, which addresses things like water fountains in the parks, et cetera, irrigation systems, the pool pays for itself through the Recreation Trust. So any and all expenses related to pool operations, you guys aren't seeing as bills. The Recreation Trust is paying that through the Recreation Board. So, of course, our water bill for the pool is by far the largest of all water bills this side of the Mississippi. That bill gets paid through the trust. What you see here represents irrigation systems, water fountains, maintenance operations, et cetera.
Is that all the questions for the operating? Should we go on to the capital?
Well, can I ask a quick question? So related to that, your last comment about covering all the operational expenses for the pool out of the trust, can you comment on where we stand with sign-ups for this coming year? And
yeah, I can comment on it. As of the last rec board meeting, which was a week and a half ago, trying to pull these numbers out of my head, we were 300 or 400 people ahead of the 2013 sign-up pace, so that was a good sign. As of a couple of days ago, I think we had about 1,700 people signed up. We've been above 5,000 the first 2 years of the new pool, so certainly hope to get past that 5,000 number. The deadline for the discounted price is April 15th, so we usually see a big surge in this week between now and the 15th because folks are trying to take advantage of the savings that comes with that discount. So we need those folks to sign up. That's how we generate the revenue to pay for the large operational expenses that come with a facility like the pool.
do you want to say one more time that discounted deadline is?
Yeah, April 15th. You can register online.
Do you also, you and I spoke the other day, and you were talking about, I think at the time I spoke to you, you were reviewing applications for scholarship for the pool. Do you want to say just a word about that? It's kind of a nice thing that we can do that everybody might appreciate hearing about.
Sure. Well, we accept applications from any resident that feels like they need some kind of financial assistance to get pool membership, go to summer camp, or anything that we do. The summer is the busiest time for that. We've already processed about 15 applications from 15 different families, and those 15 represent a subsidy that we're already into of over $10,000 to our residents to offset the fees so that they can afford to send their kids to camp, sign up for the pool, skateboard camp, whatever the case may be. It'll probably be well over $30,000 by the time the summer's over. Fortunately, we have a very healthy amount of money that came from a Robert Wood Johnson Legacy Grant 5 or 6 years ago, and that money is specifically for scholarships. It grows each year. Last couple years, it's grown roughly the amount that we've spent, so we're keeping our balance in a healthy spot, and we subsidize many, many families for many thousands of dollars, and we think it's probably the most important thing we do. So if anybody needs that, 380 Witherspoon Street, call us, come see us. We have Spanish-speaking staff, so happy to help.
And I want to remind council too, we have a 9 p.m. hard stop to this meeting, so you're doing fine, but I don't want to keep moving it along too, so we have time for everybody.
So I'm happy to move on to the capital part unless anybody has any other questions on the operations piece. Okay, the capital budget, which I think Dolores passed out a handout that kind of gives a brief description of each of the 9 items that are listed for 2014. Those 9 items total $317,000, $317,500. If you take out the Mary Moss Park piece of it for now, those other 8 projects are all directly related to our park maintenance function and very important and much needed park upgrades at many of our parks. The equipment that we're requesting is directly related to being able to do the work we need to do to either get parks back up to at least par or take them from par to better than par. Some of the facility-related things like the basketball court improvements, those are things that happen every 3 to 5 to 8 years. It's a weather-related thing. Freeze-thaw cracks the courts, they become dangerous, they must be repaired. The vehicle-related things, again, we're taking on a big chunk. There's equipment that we need to be able to do it well. Our staff in the maintenance area has gotten bigger with more seasonal people. We need to be able to deploy them in multiple directions. We have to have the equipment to do that, otherwise we're not nearly as efficient as I expect that we should be. So the sheet you have gives a little bit of a detail on each of those things. I'm happy to answer questions about any of them.
Ben, is the Bobcat that is in here in the capital plan a front-end loader, or what is it?
Bernie, it's a Bobcat that will be able to have multiple attachments. It has a front-end loader, but on the back it can have an attachment that does any number of things. I'm sure you've seen it. The back could be an aerator, it could be a slit seater, a broadcast seater. You could take the front-end loader off and put a plow on it. It has multiple uses, and some of the other items deal with attachments for that. It's something that we really, really wish we would have had in this past year as we've gotten into some of the former borough parks that are much smaller. The equipment we have can't get into those parks without making a total mess. This is a smaller, more agile piece of equipment that can do lots of things, as well as help with snow removal. And the other part of that is having something like that will allow us to continue to look for ways to outsource less maintenance that right now we outsource because we either don't have the equipment or the manpower. We're looking for ways to do more of this work in-house because we can do it cheaper, and frankly, we can usually do it better than the contractors.
Ms. Butler?
Is the $200,000 for Mary Moss Park, is that design work that you're planning on doing? Is the $1 million from the county grant, don't we have $1.4 million out of that total? There was the county grant and then some matching funds for that. Is that?
Yeah, the total was, the county grant money is $767,000. The matching piece from, at the time, the 2 municipalities was roughly $383,000, so approximately 1.1. The 200 you see is us splitting it up in anticipation that only the first phase of that project would happen in 2014. The bulk of it will probably happen in winter/spring of 2015, and there is money in there for 15. That timeline is, is hard to pin down at this particular moment. We've reapplied to the county, that's done, we're waiting to hear from them. Once we hear from them, and hopefully what we hear is a yes, move forward, we would start rolling the ball towards an RFP on design services. So I certainly think that 200 is enough to cover that initial design phase, and then we would get to the point, hopefully late fall, early winter, where we'd develop bid documents, and that's where the bigger chunk of the money is going to get spent.
All right, but this money's already dedicated to that purpose, correct?
Yeah, the way that the reapplication went with support of the council and the rec board is that the Mary Moss Park renovation is the clear number one priority of that funding.
When I'm looking at the 6-year plan document, I see that Mary Moss Spur Ground has all the money in there for the next 3 years, but I know there might be other projects that are on at least Rec's wish list that I don't see in here. For example, if there's going to be significant field work done at the CP fields, and
Right.
I don't know. I think it'd be helpful, even if some of those things may not come to fruition in the next 6 years, if they can get put on this list, because it helps us to have more accurate numbers and to plan better too. Or maybe it's on here and I just don't see it.
It is on there. It's the second from last item that's a recreation item on page 2, right above artificial turf. There's no money assigned to it, but, okay, gotcha. It's on my copy. But yeah, that, I agree, and we actually talked today, Kathy and I, about, or Bob and I, about, as we move forward, figuring out how to position that funding in the right year so that it gets on the radar. Understanding that that project's a big project, and it's gonna, the funding's gonna have to come from multiple sources, not just the governing body. It's gonna have to come from private groups, the Parks and Rec Fund, and lots of folks.
Right. Yeah, but it is a big, important project and something that we want to make sure that we're saving for in order to do it. Because I know there's a great need for it in the community.
Agreed. It is the most important thing that we need to do in the next 2 or 3 years, for sure.
Yep.
What was Kathy's
You have to speak at the mic, though, so.
What was Kathy's response while he's getting up to the mic?
I
I
just-
didn't,
That it was on the list, and we didn't mean it to drop off. What happened was, I went back after we had the comments from the last one, that there were too many zeros on there, and I sort of collapsed some of the line items that had zeros, but I should have only done that for like the 2013s, because if there's things that you still need to consider, we just don't have the funding on there yet, then, you need to see that on the list. So I'll fix that for our next version.
thank you.
Yeah, that may clarify it, because the target was to make sure that the capital plan was something that worked within our debt plan, and that required that things be taken off the list. And one of the things that got taken off the list was was that field, because we couldn't afford it within the capital plan in the time frame unless you struck monies from elsewhere or funded it from some other source. So maybe you ought to look at having 2 different lists, one that's the capital plan that will work consistent with the capital policy and the debt policy, and one's the capital wish list.
Well,
Was that done by administration, or? Okay.
it was done by who?
Can't do it all. That's the bottom line. We can, but we'll be in conflict.
So I think this just speaks to a really important point then. So I think having the list of things that get bumped off would be helpful, I think, for council to see, because some of those hard choices are, and I think this is one that's like, it's not happening in 2014 anyway, so I think we have time, but I think just in terms of having a good process to be able to work a review of that into, as we review the budget would be a good thing.
Well, and we want to be clear on who we blame for that.
Does anybody have any other questions?
Mr. Simon?
Yes, on the 6-year plan on the detail, Mary Moss Sprayground has $500,000 last year. Is that also coming from the grant, or is that from another source?
No, that would have been from the grant. We're just a year later, so that money, as I understand it, Kathy, tell me if I'm wrong, is non-existent for 13. It's all just been shifted forward.
So, okay, so there's 200 this year and 650 next year. There's not really another 500 anywhere. That should be crossed off.
Actually, it was part of the approved capital for last year. And it was, I remember we put it in place at the not knowing really what was going to happen with the grant, but in anticipation that there might be some preliminary work that could have been done, and it was almost sort of setting a place mark for that project as we worked through the process of reallocating the grant. And then, so really, if you look at this, that total amount, which totals to $1,150,000, that's what we're anticipating will be the total cost of the project. And then or actually, it's a little bit more than that, I'm sorry.
It's 1.35.
And then $767,000 of that will be funded by a grant. So our part is the rest of it. And as we put this into the capital plan, if you look on the summary sheet, we also put some spending numbers down at the bottom, and then how we might finance that, and we took into consideration any grants that we might get towards that, so that we don't obviously have to fund that. So this is how it just works out. We really put it in last year as an earmark, or just to keep that project marked in case we had some spending against it. And then the rest of it is how we see it coming out. So there may be some design work and a little bit of work this year, and then the rest of it done next year.
But we are expecting a total project cost of $1.35 million.
That's the estimate, but again, that's just the authorization, and of that, $767,000 is grant funded.
Yeah, I'm struggling with this, and I apologize for not having reviewed this in more detail ahead of this meeting, because I had thought that we were having the problem with the grant that we were going to have too much money, even if we spent some of it on the spray ground.
Well, let me clarify that.
It's too much money.
Well, no, but just let me finish the sentence. I had thought that there were two other projects that were also identified as using additional funds from that grant, plus our matching funds, right? And so this is turning out to be significantly larger than I remember it being, and I haven't double-checked all the figures, so I don't know if I've got my wires crossed or not on that.
No, you have it right. The grant reapplication that went to the county is for three things. It's priority one is the Mary Moss Park spray ground. That, again, our cost estimates are very premature until we get the approval and go forward and get real cost estimates. The second priority to that application is some very preliminary environmental and geotechnic testing of the soil and the ground at Community Park South, a facility that has been many things over the years. Lance, you know this, used to be a dump, used to be a garden. There's all kinds of changing of the contour of the ground out there, and we need to figure out what's going on before we even think about coming back to this council or anybody else and asking for multi-millions of dollars to do work out there. And the third part, Patrick, would be a potential partnership with the school systems to renovate the existing gymnasium across the street in the part of the Valley Road building that is not in debate about its future, the part of the building that the school administration's in. They have a desire to renovate that and get it back to active recreation space. That's something that would benefit the municipality and the recreation operation as well. So there's three prongs to that application, Mary Moss being the clear first priority and the most expensive of the three. How much it comes in at, and if there's money left over to do part two and part three of that application, I think time will tell. I believe there will be, but I don't know that for certain until we move forward with the Mary Moss piece.
So is the reapplication for a larger grant amount then? Because I see 1.35 here and another 350,000 for the Valley Road, which I assume is that other project you're referring to.
The reapplication is not for additional fundings. We're talking about that same 767 from the county and the municipal match of 383. I'm not sure where the 1.3 number comes from.
Well, the 1.3 is the 135 is the total for the Mary Moss spray ground on the 6-year plan. And then we have another 350,000 next year under Valley Road for rec improvements, which I assume is the gym you're referring to. So this is adding up to a lot more than I certainly had been carrying around in my head based on the earlier conversations.
I got you. I see where you're at. To clarify on the list that you're looking at, the Valley Road building rec improvements, the $350,000 placeholder for 15, that is not what we're talking about through the grant. That money is a placeholder because Ben is going to wait in the weeds until nobody can figure out what to do across the street, and then he's going to show up and say, let's build a community center. That's what that money is. that 350 is not connected to the rehab of the gym. That's a separate idea that we know will probably never happen, but again, in the spirit of getting things on mayor and council's radar, that's what that is.
All right, so in terms of the 3 projects that are in line for the grant in order of priority, are all 3 on the 6-year plan? It looks to me like 2 of them are not, if I'm reading it right. Is that correct, Kathy?
The ones that he's talking about for the application?
Yes.
I'm not sure where those are, the other 2.
Well, so he mentioned the Mary Moss Park, he mentioned the CP
Right.
Park Field, some preliminary work with respect to the soil testing.
Correct.
And whatever else, and then the partnership with the schools for the gym.
Right. Well, the total amount is the 1.3. That's all there is, and it's all listed under Mary Moss Park. The idea is if we don't spend the entire 1.3 on Mary Moss Park, then and only then would it, I mean, it's possible we would spend the whole $1.3 million on Mary Moss Park.
Yeah,
I
the
want to
1.3
bring us back because I think we're getting in the weeds on this one thing right now, and I just want to make sure we get to hear from all the departments. So I think
I can answer that
okay.
in one sentence for Patrick. The 1.3 is the total amount. Everyone's is very clear that Mary Moss is the priority. If we spent every dollar that on Mary Moss, so be it. We don't imagine we will, and then part 2 and 3 of the application would then get funded with whatever may be left over once Mary Moss is funded at 100%. So they don't show on there, but the total dollar value on there is the full amount. Does that help?
Well, except that the numbers don't add up, because the grant is for a little over $750,000, and then the municipality is supposed to match half of that, right? Is that what I...
Correct, yeah.
All right, so there's still $200,000 gap. Is that we are intending to spend $200,000 more than the match? Is that the intent, or is that an error?
The intent certainly is not to spend any more than the match. The grant plus the match is, we're not going to spend more than that for sure.
Okay, so could I simply ask Ms. Mondo, I can talk, Ms. Monzo to please review that line and make sure that those tie out?
We will. I
Thank
think
you.
what happened was that we were looking at trying to get an estimate for Mary Moss, and we didn't want to be too conservative, and so I think that's why we went with the 1.3, even though it was over the grant plus the match amount. But, and maybe with the other 2 projects, we should do as was suggested and still list them on there with 0 amounts, but with a little asterisk that says that this is sort of a wish list item,
Right.
given other factors. If, Mary Moss comes in less than the full grant and
Right.
match amount, so we can do that.
I think maybe most helpful for us would be just another column off to the right with the estimate for them if you've got a dollar number.
Okay. I want to thank Ben, and I should say that this process is like this is an opportunity for you to do the overview, for us to ask questions, but it's not the end of when we can ask questions. So if we get through the end of the time and people still have questions, I know Kathy has said she's fine with setting up, Kathy and Sandy can have small group meetings with us, and I know all of our department heads are always available too if we have further follow-up questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to welcome Bob Huff from Infrastructure and Operations, which includes roads, sewer, vehicle maintenance, buildings and grounds, and shade tree.
Ben stole some of my time.
No, I'm being very fair.
Yeah.
Everyone will get the same
If you
amount.
want the mowing back, I'm sure he'll give you the time back.
Not really.
There you go. How's that? Start with the operating budgets.
What page would, yeah.
Well, operating budgets are in most, well, we could start, first one that actually comes up is parking meter maintenance. I have it on page 20 of mine. And if we want, we can actually roll back a little bit sooner to page 18 with Sustainable Princeton, since I've had a lot of the oversight with them recently with regard to their budget. I don't think there's really anything to discuss there other than just to point out, I'm sorry, 16 and 17, 16, the bottom of 16, that my office does oversee the money that comes in and out with regard to that group, and works in conjunction with them and then the finance department with regard to their expenses. Moving along, going to the parking meter maintenance on page 20 into page 21. There is an increase in that amount this year, and that's going to be attributed to the collection and moving of the canisters, the coin canisters. We've added that in. Kathy's added that in recently as far as the cost to get those canisters transported. In the past, staff has moved those canisters. Staff is not bonded and really shouldn't be undertaking that task of moving them down to Eastern. So we've been working with them for them to do that task for us. So that is an additional cost. I guess it's about $70,000 for this year for them to move those, and we're working with them right now, and hopefully that gets started in the next couple weeks with them handling that. But otherwise, the rest of the budget would be the same from last year.
You know, is that another reason to raise the meter rates? Because I always think we should be passing parking expenses to the users, not to the general taxpayers. Right?
That is how this is structured, absolutely. So we should review the meter rates, you know, periodically anyway. We can do that again and work up an analysis, not probably for this budget, but certainly going forward.
Just from my understanding, the parking meter maintenance is not part of the parking utility. It's in Public Works.
What's that? It's the utility.
It is the utility. All right, so the utility overall is generating $1 million profit for the town. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes.
All right. Yes. Yes, this is funded through that utility.
So we don't have to increase the parking rates?
So
Well,
what?
we can if we want more money to come into
Oh,
the
you're
budget.
saying we should reduce the...
Well, no, I'm saying, no, but we may not have to
I'm saying that
increase
it's
if the money's...
net positive already.
Yes, I know, but
Significant.
I feel like we should be keeping the meter rates up with our expenses. I mean, we don't want to reduce the profit, right? I mean,
Reducing the profit, what you want to do is watch where your expenses are going, primarily to debt service for the parking garage. That's a structured debt plan, and so you have to look at your parking rates for the garage, and then the garage trigger looking at rates that are on the street, because you want to keep them in sync with each other, so that one is not, more popular, that they complement each other.
Right.
As I mentioned the other night, that's something that we need to at least start looking at in the next couple months. And then that revenue is not necessarily tied. We'll get sufficient revenue to offset our budget. That revenue will then, whatever it is, get produced and go into the...
Yeah, you're not coming over TV at all. Sorry. Then that revenue will revert into the, whatever we get will revert into the utility and would just stay in there as
Right.
surplus that you could allocate at any point back to your operating budget.
right.
I have a question on the line 299 miscellaneous expenses. So it's budgeted for over $250,000, but the actual expenditure last year was $31.
And you can see that in the line above that, 282, it was 241. It's just a matter of where the items were charged as far as whether it was under 280 in number 282 or 299. But that's the armored car, it's DEP permits, the groundwater monitoring, credit card services, We have, underneath there is also the jitney meter bags, and in the future, we'll have to make sure that it's properly charged, or more accurately charged, I guess is the better way of putting it, between either specialized services and miscellaneous expenses.
I also think that there are some charges missing from there that get allocated after the fact, after the year, because fringe benefits and things like that, the health insurance and FICA and all of those are supposed to get charged off to here too, and I think that that was done after we updated these, so, it just may not be showing in there yet.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this?
Just for those two line items, I think it would be helpful if we could get a little bit more detail. There's quite a lot of money in those two lines, just to, to have as two blocks, so.
Road Department, page 25. Again, looking at the same amount from 2013 to 2014. Have to admit that the one item that's got me concerned already is 241 for salt and sand. We've seen 117,000 and then some. We just did another bill the other night, or the other day, for $70,000. So we are well over the 117, probably approaching about 160, 170 right now, that number for this past winter.
But wasn't this a unusual winter? I mean, you don't expect that. I'm just saying, we don't expect that next year. I mean,
We expect you to do a better job next year of controlling the weather, Bob.
it's unusual.
We're working on the dome as we speak.
Well, so Bob, with respect to that comment, between last year's budget and this year's budget, are we even, or is there money that we have to find that's not yet in the budget?
We were, last year for the total expenses, as you can see, it was around 210. It's a case of us, monitoring our expenses throughout the year, but I'm going to tell you, I would have to say, Patrick, that we're going to have to probably find some dollars to cover that, at least some portion of that amount that we were over. I mean, we know it was an incredible winter.
Actually, it might be helpful if you, and I know you've been working on this, but get to us and we can get to the council at a cost, what happened with the storms for just this year, in this year's budget, so that we have that cost. And I think, if we are going to do an amendment to the budget, we probably should amend and at least get in there what we've spent, and perhaps maybe even some more if we anticipate, because we can't really, I think we have to anticipate that we may have some storms at the end of the year, but, it may be a low expectation, but we should at least be budgeting for what we've spent to date. So if you can do that for the overtime and for the other materials, I think that would give us a good idea as to what we should do. Because I think, too, that you have perhaps like on line 265, where you have miscellaneous rental expenses. We were talking about a piece of equipment that was broken, and you may want to have to rent something, and that could be more than what we even have budgeted in there now. So I think we can look at some of these specific line items and either add to the budget or adjust some other line items that maybe have some give.
Bob, this may be jumping ahead to capital, but do we have sufficient storage space for our expected needs for salt and sand? In other words, last year we ran out of salt, and that would indicate to me maybe we don't have enough storage space for the salt.
We have adequate storage. The issue with running out was simply that there was no supply coming in to us or anybody else. We asked for supply well in advance of what we would normally do, as the supply was going down, and just because as it started to become an issue, we continued with International Salt as well as some others, went to numerous companies trying to get material, and they just flat out didn't have it. But no, we have room to store it in the dome right now, Bernie. The dome needs a little bit of repair to it. That's going to be done by staff during the summer. But in general, we have sufficient room to store it there. Our issue just was there was no supply.
Are we full at this point?
At this point, no, we are not. We have material. We will get more material now as we get towards the end of next year. We'll get additional stock in anticipation of next winter. But at this point, we did not want to fill it up because, like I said, we do need to be able to get some equipment in there to make a couple repairs to that. So we don't want to have it so that we can't get inside the building.
But we plan to be full, let's say, by the 1st of November?
That is we're typically by October 15th, we are, have it full so that we're ready to go.
Thank you.
Mr. Simon?
I have a process question. I apologize if this was already covered elsewhere. We're covering the operating expenses of Public Works today. As far as staffing and that part of the budget, is that something that we're expected to review as part of this discussion or separately? Because we're looking at only the OEs.
I mean, this is an opportunity to ask questions, and like I said, it's we have about 40 minutes for each of the department heads. So if there's not enough time, you could do that follow-up. So if you have a question, you should ask it.
Well, okay. So the question I do have is that we heard in council maybe a couple of months ago that the street maintenance the past 2 years has been less in terms of in-house work than we had in prior years in the township as a standard. And part of that was attributed to storms, and part of that was attributed to, I think, just the stress of consolidation. But is our budget this year, including personnel and operating expenses, are we covering road paving with in-house people at pretty much the level that the township had 2 years ago?
We are not anticipating doing any major roads at this point in time as far as paving. We have the intention we have a number of spots that we have been developing a running list, so to speak, of pothole areas and areas that have deteriorated where the roads are roads that we are capable of handling, secondary and tertiary roads, cul-de-sacs, et cetera, along those lines. We have money for that. We have the staff. One of the things that we believe in, and the management part of the Public Works, that with Ben's group taking over some of this, the maintenance of the parks and lawns and stuff that we were doing, we were using experienced staff to supervise summer help. We now are going to get that experienced staff back to do what they should be doing, as opposed to watching, and I don't mean to demean this, but instead of watching high school and college kids mow lawns and be with them, we can now take these experienced people who should be out doing, whether it be a building repair or be a road repair, something in the downtown area. We now have our experienced Public Works staff back off of those tasks in order to go out and plus they were doing a lot of the lawn maintenance also, between the contract that Ben did as well as the using some more summer help and adjusting those. We expect to have some of those staff people back so that we can do those items. And we may incur a couple rental costs for some equipment in order to do that. We've got some some money built in here for that. In the past, we've done it, and there's also a couple pieces of equipment with varying degrees of condition that we have shared with Lawrence that we in the past have used to do road work.
Okay, the challenge for me as a relatively new public official is sort of understanding what to compare that to. So if we take as the baseline, say, 3 years ago in the township, are we roughly intending to do about the same as we did 3 years ago in-house? Because and the reason I ask is because my understanding is that if we don't do it in-house, it's actually more expensive to outsource it.
Yeah, 3 years ago, I believe they did about 1.5 miles to 2 miles worth of roads at that time. If things go according to plan, I would say this year, we probably are looking at trying to do about 1 mile worth of roads. We look at what we still have to clean up through this community, and we're going to be cleaning up this community still for quite a while throughout the spring and the summer, especially with the schedule that we have for it. So are we going to do I expect to do the same amount that we did 3 years ago? No, I don't. But do I expect to be able to do about 1 mile worth? Yes. But I also have to deal with a lot of other issues right now, especially the cleanup that is never ending. And one of our problems, Kathy mentioned before about, a rental of another piece of equipment. I don't know if you've gone down Princeton Pike and looked in our compost facility, but it's packed. It's done.
Yeah, we covered that.
There's nothing else that can go in there right now. We are processing material so that between Lawrence and Princeton, it's pretty full. And we've been working with DEP, Greg Whitehead in particular down there, in order to get us back to the point where we're above water. So we have staff that's working this weekend, all weekend, grinding leaves and brush and whatnot in order to get ourselves, back in the game, so to speak, with regard to that. It's an incredible amount of material throughout the community.
So are you talking about residential cleanup or the parks or both?
Everything.
And are you talking about
along the road
pickup?
right-of-ways? That's from municipal trees, material put out from residents, parks, and it's in both communities.
Ms. Butler?
Is that why it's not being picked up, is because there's nowhere to take it at the moment?
No, we are taking it right now. We are taking it either to Britain or Reliable Wood in Plainsboro. Reliable's given us actually a better deal right now than Britain. So we are continuously picking up. There's that much that's going out that we are using as many people as possible, plus doing potholes and everything else at the same time. But no, we are out there with at least 2 crews every day picking up material.
So when we talked about filling the potholes the other night, we heard that main piece of equipment at Lawrence that we shared with them to do road paving is in disrepair, and they're not in a place to fix it. I mean, how is that being accounted for in terms of thinking about doing road? I guess what I'm saying is I had the impression that we were not going to be able to do road work.
We are looking, if we have to do it, we will probably either rent or we've talked to some of the contractors that do road work for us and have spoken to them about possibly renting equipment even from them. They have available extra equipment, and it may even be cheaper for us to rent from some of those folks than it would be from some of the other, the companies that actually rent that type of equipment out. And again, it'll all come down to planning. I mean, know that this is the week you're doing it, rent the piece of equipment, and use it. Don't have it sit for 3 weeks while, do 1 week's worth of work and rent it for 3 weeks. That's obviously not cost effective.
Again, we're hoping you can control the weather for that.
What's that?
We're hoping you can control the weather for that. Just one last question on the road maintenance then. Are we planning to outsource the rest, or are we going to basically fall a little bit more behind in terms of our sort of standard maintenance schedule?
Staff currently, along with engineering, we are still evaluating some of the roads, and we're making some decisions on what we will have to do. Probably have a better feel for that in about 2 weeks of where we really are with some of the roads that we need to tackle for this year, and then making a determination, can we do these, what are we doing in-house, what are we potentially having to do outside?
And then do Ms. Manzo and Ms. Webb know the range of numbers you're working with?
They know it could be ugly, yes. Garbage and trash removal.
What page are you on?
26?
Yep, there we go.
Page 26.
Yes. Page 26, those numbers, there's adjustments that Kathy and Sandy have made after working with some numbers from Jack West and myself with regard to actual collection. As the Public Works Subcommittee knows, our numbers on trash collected are much lower than what we had anticipated, and they've adjusted the budget accordingly based on what's currently coming in. I guess this past month, for the second month in a row, we were just slightly over 300 tons for the month, and when we originally looked at this, we were expecting almost 650 tons per month. So the trash is, I don't know where it is.
Mr. Simon?
So, just a quick question on the trash numbers. Does this also include a placeholder for the community reimbursement for condos, et cetera, or is that handled elsewhere?
That's elsewhere. The Condo Act, yeah, that's elsewhere.
So if we go back
Where
and
elsewhere is it? Just out of,
there is a Condo Act reimbursement line somewhere else in the
There-
budget.
there-
Yes,
it's
and we see it in the summary also. The reason I asked is my memory was that the contract was actually less than this, and I thought when the numbers were originally developed, they had the reimbursement in there, and I may be misremembering. I haven't double-checked this, so I can certainly review that.
Are there any other questions on the garbage?
Buildings and grounds. Again, holding from 13 to 14.
I do have a question on building and grounds.
Yes.
We were at the, I guess we call it Monument Building yesterday, and the front part, the cement is in terrible shape of that building. Is that included in these prices?
No, it is.
Because it is in bad shape. I don't know if you guys have gone there. I looked, it's in the deteriorating,
where, Lance?
right in front of the building, if you're going down the stairs, and on the
At the
right-hand
bottom of the
side, I mean,
steps?
the cement is just plopping off. We really need to do something, so if it's not in there,
I'll have to go back and take a look at that. I mean, that was a problem after the former Borough Hall was rebuilt several years ago. The stucco tends to fall off, and there's some sort of drainage problem behind those big steps that were constructed that we put weep holes in, I know, a few years back that maybe they're plugged and they're not
they may
weeping
not
any
be
longer,
weeping.
so I'll
Okay,
have
well-
to take a look at that, Lance.
so you may need to add to the cost here.
Well, since we're mentioning things that we think need to be repaired, there's also the kiosks. I mean, I hope we can, since we don't have all these mowers, maybe that's one of the things that they can do is tackle the kiosks.
I love the kiosks. We actually am working with an Eagle Scout right now on doing the first one, and we'll see how that goes, and we'll take on the second one. So that won't cost us too much, just a couple thousand hours of time.
An Eagle Scout, somebody going for their certification? Okay, so they'll need help, right? Yeah, all right, well, let us know.
Anything else on buildings and grounds? Next would be shade tree.
It looks totally identical to last year.
Yep.
Just as a little, I wonder if we could change that to shade tree. I mean, because I know in the past, residents have looked at this and said, what? We're paying all this money for a shade tree commission, and it's really for the trees. It's not really for the commission. Just a little suggestion. Yeah.
Just one question. It never shows actual. It just shows Is that on purpose? Adopted budget and then budget requests?
Right, it's completely missing.
There's nothing at 2013 that we spent. I just thought it was just me, but
Oh, yeah.
I think as we struggle through consolidating and where to charge things, I think we ended up charging this directly to open space where it gets eventually charged when it should kind of run through the detail of this budget. So we can get the detail from the Open Space Trust and fill it into the components here as if it did get charged here, just so that you can see what the costs were.
Right, I mean, even just the, what we're spending on our planting program.
Right.
It would be good to know that.
Isn't there a tree fund in addition, and doesn't that fund some of the tree plantings?
Yeah, where is that fund?
We do have some reserves, miscellaneous reserves, that I know that things were either they were fines or something that people were required to pay over to the town if, they had a violation of some such. And so we reserve those, and I don't know if we periodically report those to the Shade Tree Commission so that they can, maybe if they wanted to use that for a specific project or something, they could.
But it's not shown in here?
No, that's
In
not
this
part of
budget?
current fund budget, no.
Okay, because I know there is a fund that the Borough Shade Tree Commission solicited some, money for, for trees, and
All right,
people
I'm
can
not-
buy, people can give that money and then have a memorial tree.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah, in the former township, it was a little different. We really had some funds, but it was as a result of something punitive that we had given to somebody
I
as
think
a
we need to
result.
get that
So,
clarified for the Shade
yeah.
Tree Commission, because, sometimes people want to donate money.
All right, we
for a
can get the
tree.
balances to them for their next meeting, and then, I don't think it's hordes of money. I don't know what the former borough's reserve was. I know that periodically they did use some of the township's reserves before consolidation, but for things like planting or for a little special project that they did. So we'll get that to them, and that way they can use that throughout the year to plan for
Yeah.
what they want to do.
It would maybe also to know if citizens wanted to donate money for a tree, they
Well,
could,
and that
where,
sounds like
how
a-
exactly to write the check.
I want to bring us back
Okay.
too, so
All right.
we can keep moving.
Right below that, mechanics and vehicles. We have increased that number this year. Parts and repairs have been extensive. We have a aging fleet, and we unfortunately can spend a considerable amount of money on parts and repairs to that fleet. So we have requested an increase in our budget for all the vehicles, and this covers all the vehicles and some major pieces of equipment that we have and that we maintain.
So are you able to do any kind of savings because of consolidation on that, or is that one of those?
Throughout last year, and especially towards the end of the year, we were using at times just about every available piece of equipment that we had in order to do various tasks, and unfortunately, they all require being maintained.
Yeah, I think the emphasis needs to be on the aging fleet. Neither community over the past almost 4 years has invested much money in replacement plans, and Bob has done a good job of pulling all that together now. And while we may not make a lot of inroads on a lot of replacements this year, you will have a plan going forward. And we're just keeping equipment on the road. There'll be an auction to get rid of a bunch of surplus equipment that we're really not using or that should just be disposed of. But the key here is that the equipment is aging. We've missed some life cycles and replacements, so we're continuing to invest money.
I should point out, right underneath vehicles, I think we were mentioning the Condo Services Act. There's that line item there, $250,000. And I'm guessing that the actual numbers, because we're getting ready to bill people and pay, right? Next budget is on page 36, sewer operating. I see that it still calls us a joint agency.
Bob, returning to the Condo Services Act, there's quite a discrepancy, almost 10 to 1, between the actuals for 2013 and what had been budgeted for 2013 and what's budgeted for this year.
I think the only thing charged in the actual for last year so far was some street lighting reimbursables. I don't even believe we reimbursed anyone for either snow plowing or for the trash pickup yet. So that'll be calculated sometime soon. It's usually done around this time, and it'll be charged against last year's budget for all of last year.
Sewer operating, same number as last year.
What page are you on, please?
I am on 36 to 37. Actual expenditures were higher, especially you'll look under 273, other contracted services. We had a couple significant pumping station repairs and issues last year that were done as operating. And that's where you see it. We also had some of the chemicals that we use for odor control had an increase in cost last year. We looked at other means, other chemicals. Unfortunately, they all went up. We have a couple other ideas that we have tried so far this winter with regard to odor control. So far, they seem to be pretty successful. We'll find out how successful it is as the weather starts to warm up. Because now people will start going outside and we'll find out how well we're doing and whether or not they smell the stations and some of our larger trunk lines where we get our odor complaints. But our pump stations we did have some repairs on them throughout the year, and one of the reasons you see the bump, we spent our line item 206 and then some.
And those are really old, are they not?
We have stations that are twice their useful life.
Yeah.
And I say that, what was that? I will give a pitch to the staff and tell you that a lot of our pump stations live because of the tender loving care that they get several times a week. By the guys that are in the SOC. So keeps them up and running. A few years ago, we had somebody come in and look at them and basically said that if we tried to turn this system over, you were looking at millions of dollars to replace these stations because nobody would touch them. Because some of them are, the cans themselves are 40 and 50 years old. So we have we do have somebody who comes in and does some welding for us every so often on them out of Trenton, and we just have a really good staff that maintains the equipment in them. But it is an old collection system with old stations.
Should that be part of a capital plan? In other words, planned replacement of the stations over time?
It probably should, Bernie. We do have in this year, there's a $50,000. I need to replace some pumps in one of them. But ultimately, should there sort of be a sinking fund, I guess, to someday look at replacing these? There probably should be some consideration given to that to start to accumulate funds towards any replacement with these. But they're older. We have a combination. We've got cans, metal cans. We have concrete structures. We have a whole range of them. We make sure that they are coated inside as they're supposed to be, and all the protection is always up and running. So as far as, contact with the soil. But you are right, we should probably be thinking long-term that we need to develop a fund for replacement. The one that jumps out at me is All Saints pumping station, which unfortunately, there was a proposed development up in that area that would have replaced that station in its entirety. But at this point, that's one that jumps out at me. It's a small station, only handles a handful of people, but it's one of our older stations with some issues.
I think that station has been down a couple of times, is that right?
The issue is power. We lose power out there with that station. Liz knows.
Is that your station?
I didn't know.
It's in the neighborhood there. We lose power there. We've had some issues. We've had the utility company out. We've done a lot of had them do a lot of tree trimming of utility lines in that area. That goes to that station.
I mean, if we've got a capital plant that is really 50 years old or older, we ought to be looking at some kind of replacement plan for that capital plant.
Well, do the sewer fees, shouldn't they go toward that, or?
They do, they can.
They do, I mean.
I want to table this discussion. It's obviously an important one. I'd like to wrap up the rest of I&O in the next 10 minutes, including capital, so let's keep moving.
And the next part is solid waste.
I actually have a quick question about the Stony Brook Regional Sewer Authority. It looks like our costs are going down, are projected to go down from last year. Is that because they're lowering the rates, or why?
Stony Brook, I'd like to think it's because of our I&I program. So while their numbers go up, our flow goes down, so our percentage of the expenses goes down.
Does the hospital move have anything to do with that also?
The hospital, we lost some flow from them moving out, but also our base flow, our I&I number is pretty low. So, yes, does it have an impact? But I think it's more the flow that we've taken out over the years, and in particular, especially when you look at the fact that it's a 7-year moving average. So the hospital's not been out 7 years, so that certainly gets, whatever's come out has been divided off by 7.
Yeah, I can show you a chart, for that. It's really an impressive how our outflows gone down.
Any questions on solid waste?
Who is the Stony Brook industrial user?
Who else was it? It was just the hospital. Yeah, there was a slight surcharge on that.
That's why I went down.
Yeah.
So, I guess coming back to sewer for just a quick second, the fact that we ended up going over our budget in terms of some of the expenses, does that mean that the sewer fees did not in effect pay for everything and we had to pay for some of it out of the town budget, or does that mean that, or did the sewer fees cover it?
We actually take that into consideration when we adjust the rates for this year and forward. We always look back at what happened to the actual, and we can account for that. If we didn't raise enough revenue to cover all of the expenditures, then we do in the subsequent year.
Okay, so the town ends up net even over time. It doesn't end up losing some of that out of tax revenue?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
For the most part, yes. I mean, there may be some anomaly to that, but the goal is to have the sewer fees cover all of those operating costs.
Well,
And-
operating and expense and
Yes.
capital as well, right?
Yes, we had a capital in there and called debt service from,
Yeah, the debt service.
right, so.
Thank you.
All right, unfortunately, we're going to have to do the speed version of the capital.
That's fine.
Okay.
Parts and vehicles. How's that? Throughout both, whether it be SOC and then various streets, the buildings, you see a lot of requests for various parts that we have capitalized over the years. I'm sure we can get into a discussion on whether they should be considered capital or they should be considered operating. We've obviously have always done them as capital expenses. There is some vehicle, some equipment issues. One in particular that's very significant is a new loader. One of our loaders blew a transmission last week. Initial estimate was about 30 grand to repair. Looks like it's going to come in way under that, fortunately. But unfortunately, those pieces of equipment become very expensive when things break, especially the older ones. The one that we had a transmission issue on is 24 years old. So it becomes expensive because it's harder for them to get the parts, and in some cases they're going quite a ways away to find the parts for us. But there's issues with, or not issues, there's typical funding related to SOC, the stations, our equipment, and we have some pieces of equipment there that we're looking to replace. Some of our pickup trucks that are 15, 20 years old in those two cases, that one of which is currently not operating. We're not putting any more money into it at this point. Looking through, we have some other equipment in the public works area. One thing I want to point out is regarding signs. We've had a lot of requests, and there's been a lot of discussion, I know, on some subcommittees regarding the signage throughout the community. We have a number in there that's based on what we do on a yearly basis as far as signs. I will tell you that if we go out and start doing a very extensive sign program, I've given the administration a heads up that it's a lot of money per street to deal with the signs. And quite honestly, in some cases, I think some of the things that we're looking at, I know that engineering's looking at, is the fact that they're oversigned. I mean, there's just a lot of signs that probably either, need to be condensed or, are not. So it may, but it still is, it's a high number should we tackle this over the years. We've looked at even what the cost would be to get our own sign machine. And do that. It's not very cheap. Depending on what you get, it can be between $50,000 and $75,000 to do it, but it's got a long life. You could set up your own shop. We could do our own signs. The blanks aren't that expensive. Well, they're material, but certainly over time you could do your own. We've talked to a couple other communities that do have sign machines, and they do signs for other communities and charge them to try and recoup some of their dollars, mainly because it's faster for them to get the signs done through them than to go out to another company.
Do our neighboring towns have it? Do Lawrence or Montgomery have it?
Lawrence does not have, they have a space for a sign machine. They do not have one right now. We've talked with one, Bordentown, I believe it is, does Bordentown or Burlington does signs, but at this point, they're not looking, they have enough work on their own, they're not looking to do somebody else's signs.
Well, I mean, if we did do it, it would be good to know if we had some customers.
Lawrence, I know, would be interested, and apparently Montgomery would be interested from what staff has talked to them, because they reached out to see if they had machines, and they don't, but they have an interest, and I believe it was Montgomery. I know Lawrence says, I believe Montgomery was another one.
Well, I know this is getting off the market, but I mean, how much are the machines?
Well, when you get everything together, the machine, set up a space, get the software, the hardware, everything that's required, depending what you get, between about $50,000 and $75,000 capital investment.
No, it's not.
Too bad. No, that's not too bad.
So, we've talked about it, given it some thought, have to have a space to do it, but down the line, it may be something to think about.
We can spend that just on Hall Fish and Chambers. We are going to be
Just on the little signs that we run over.
That gets run over every week. We are going to be inventorying the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood, John Street. We're working on currently we've got signs that are not in keeping with code, they're too low, there are too many of them, and as we review the parking ordinances, it could figure prominently if we change what we're doing and just harmonizing the borough and the township too, particularly in the John Witherspoon neighborhood. I think we are going to have a lot of demand for signage changes.
As far as buildings, we have money in there to maintain various buildings. The firehouses are part of that. We do, maintain and keep them up and, in good condition, and they do require repairs at time. Roof, windows in particular. Susan Patterson Center needs gutters, an expense that's there. Another thing that you see several numbers for is emergency power systems. We do have some grant money that's in the works that Bob Gregory and I are working on with FEMA through the county for the Monument Hall building, as well as for one of our pump stations. But we still need to show the money that we would have to front the money to purchase it, and then we would get reimbursed through this particular grant program. So they are shown here. We have had Tom Wells, as well as our generator servicer, GenServe, has been out here working with us over the last couple of weeks, doing load tests, in particular on this building, and looking at the potential of powering more of this particular structure up off of our existing generator. We'll take some money in order to connect various circuit boards, et cetera, and make it work, but it's certainly something that we've looked at collectively as something that's very important, and we get some of these rooms up and running should we have another incident like, another storm like Sandy, where we were looking for warming centers and relief points.
And are you happy with this 6-year plan? I mean, do you think that this covers all of the capital expenditures you think that would be prudent for us to be making?
I am, based on what I am hearing from staff, I will be honest, I'm very concerned about this building. There are things that we have found that have started to spring a leak is not the right term because there's no water pouring anywhere, but there's little odds and ends that are starting to crop up with the building as far as repairs and maintenance. So I'm beginning to get concerned that over time we're going to see more and more repairs needing to be done here, as well as to Monument and some of the other buildings. Certainly, we've got some buildings with some age on them, and with age comes issues in some of the buildings. And you've got ventilation systems and heating and air conditioning, all those things that, just like our own homes, with time, things require replacement.
So this is budgeting, I mean, when you get out a couple of years, it's almost $100,000 a year for this building. You think that's overly optimistic?
I hope that it's enough to cover some things, but just as we see things pop up, I wouldn't be surprised if we easily spend that on a yearly basis, doing maintenance and repairs.
Just to give you an idea, I mean, something we struggled with today that's not included in this budget. We had the issue last year with the mold buildup and some of the ductwork, and we just got the proposal in to do some lining in the ductwork in this building that would help prevent that down the line, or we're going to have a repeat performance. So that's a number that's not in here at all, but that could gobble up easily, close to $100,000 just to do that. So, we're going to look at developing a longer-term maintenance plan for these buildings. But I think Bob said it correctly. Borough Hall, where they spent a lot of money to redo it back in '99, now it's 15, 16 years in, and things like HVAC and other units, you're getting to the point where you really have to start to look at all of that again. And we haven't done a lot of that over the past 3 or 4 years because of, the other efforts of, getting consolidated and the like, but those are things that need to be brought back up, revisited, and then, planned out. So I would say that those numbers are pretty
we put some
optimistic.
numbers here sort of as some placeholders, and $100,000, I don't know if it's a sticker shock or nothing, but at least it tells you that, there's some real, we're not talking $4,000 and $5,000 repairs here. There's potential for some real replacement items in some of these buildings as we go along.
Is there a final question or two, and then we should probably move on to the next
Have I taken too
division?
much time already?
One other thing
No,
that
that's
I'd
fine.
like to
Okay,
point
yeah.
out just before that is something that's also very important is a radio and tracking system for our vehicles. Our vehicles don't talk to each other very well. We had 2 communication systems between the old borough and the old township. We have jerry-rigged a lot of stuff together in order for that, but I will tell you, we do have some issues with regard to communicating during events between vehicles and trucks and people. It is certainly something we've looked at. We've had IT look at this with us. And another thing that these days, just about any of these systems, you get a tracking system with it, and we've had some discussions. We've had a little bit of discussion, I know with some of you with Public Works, as well as with administration, that we really should get up to speed and become state-of-the-art with knowing where our vehicles are, the ability to track them, the ability to know what streets we've plowed, picked up on very easily through both tracking and better communications. But we do have communication issues with vehicles depending on where they are. There are times where you can be on the same street and not talk to each other, and we can be on the opposite end of the community, and the radio system doesn't talk to each other. So we do have an issue there, and we've looked at it, and it's probably between about $85,000 and $100,000 to come up with a very good system that would outfit our entire fleet, and that would be SOC, that would be the all the Public Works vehicles. They would all be able to talk to each other, and we'd also be able to talk to the police station. So we made sure that it was a communication system that worked in conjunction with that, should in an emergency management situation, we could get them all on the same frequency, or close to better communications.
If you go to that kind of communication system, do you need a dispatch center?
We can work out of, the Public Works Department. The old radio system that at one time was in the borough vehicles was manned and controlled, and we did the same thing at SOC, was manned and controlled right out of the office. But it can also, if we had to go into the emergency management center, like we did during some of the storm events, we could flip all the communication and work right through dispatch.
It's
and
not
be
through
able
a
to do it.
PC?
There's a couple different things that staff has looked at, and I can just tell you, I know that Kurt Berry has looked at it with us, and he's looked at through PCs, he's looked at it through the dispatch radios, he's looked at a bunch of different systems for us. A lot of different alternatives.
I know there's some questions down here, but then I know we could have you here all night long, but
No, I'm just wondering, wouldn't that be like a consolidation cost? I'm just wondering, couldn't that have been a consolidation expense, do you think? The communication part?
I don't know.
I mean, it seems like that's just...
That depends on who you ask. If you ask the state, I don't know, you might get a
The
different
problem is
answer.
we don't get to go ask the state for more, so.
I was wondering, that would have been
We can have a
perfect.
do-over
So,
on
but
that.
that is in the 2014 budget, right? There's a $100,000 line
Yes, it
item right
is.
there. Okay, so we would expect by a year from now, that would be history as a problem, right? Is that how we should
And
interpret that?
talking to Kurt and staff as they've looked into it, I mean, we could get up and implement it in a couple months.
Okay, so I just on the biggest ticket items that are in the capital plan, the River Road facility, we've got $0 million estimate, which is significantly lower than the previous estimates we had,
Yes,
right?
somebody sharpened my pencil for me.
Okay. I see a large line item for the firehouse, also coming under infrastructure.
They took money out of my River Road and put it into the firehouse.
Well, and so that's where I'm going with that.
I'm just kidding.
What I'm going with is that we have had discussions over the past few years about sort of a consolidated public works facility out on River Road in the neighborhood of $10 million or so, and that's not in here at all. So essentially, we are deferring that cost off of the 6-year plan, right? Or have we decided we don't need it?
Yeah, that's pretty much sitting next to the community park project. What we're going to do is we'll put down a list of those projects that I moved out for budgetary reasons, and, you know, those are decisions that you'll need to make over the next few years. If that's something you want to move up, you're going to have to make other choices to make the budget accommodate them. So we'll have that list for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Fine job as usual, Bob Huff.
You got to change seats. I'm going.
Bob, while you're making the changeover, I hope you plan on including rec in the communications plan, if that is the...
Yes. They will be. All yours.
Finally, tonight, we have Kathy Lonzo for Health and Health and Social Services, Health Department, Human Services, and Affordable Housing.
Okay, we should be able to go through these probably fairly quickly. There was a couple of minor adjustments in a couple of the budgets. So if you wanted to start with Health Department, they're on page 28 of your detail. And you also have salary and wage detail in there too, and I don't know what that page refers to, but I can just tell you that there was an increase in the salary and wages for the statute that we have to abide by. That kicked in for one of our employees last year, so there was a significant increase in one of the positions for the health department, and we went ahead and accommodated that and actually built that into our salary ordinance last year so that we could make that adjustment for this year going forward. So that's the big difference in salary and wage. In other expenses, we had an increase also in the total bottom line, but that's on the contractual line item where we did the contract with Bob Harry for interim health officer services. And that started, of course, last year and then worked through the portion of this year, and we plan on keeping him on kind of periodically. He has, not periodically, but at least in the interim short term going forward as we transition our new health officer in, and he has said that he will graciously help do that and get Jeff on board, but I have no doubt that that will happen quickly, and Bob probably won't have too many hours left here, but, you know, sad to see him go, but really happy to have Jeff on board. So I don't think there's any other real changes or anything significant in the health department budget. Did anyone have any specific questions?
Just very quickly, in the other contracted services, is that offset by an actual lack of spending on the personnel side?
Yes, we
Yes,
had less spending last year, and obviously too, because we put it in O&E where we were charging it even when Bob did. There was still a short period of time where we didn't have Bob and we didn't have Dave Henry. We had nobody, so we had some savings there. And we also had some savings in the salary and wage line item for this year because we didn't fill that until right now with Jeff. We did not reduce that line item. We could. If we wanted to really just prorate that and put in the actual amount that we'll spend this year, we could do that. But then we'll end up seeing a corresponding jump next year, even though it's offset.
Well, sure, but the combination of the contracted services and the personnel lines should about tie out to what
Yes.
we're expecting.
So we could, if you wanted to make that more accurate, I don't have any problem doing that, shift that.
Yeah, I would encourage that, yes.
Make myself a note. Okay. Human Services is on page 31. Actually, the heading is on the bottom of page 30, and then the body of it is on page 31. So we had about a $37,000 increase in this line item, and this is a much bigger budget than it has been in the past. You can see that the majority of that is on the one line item, which doesn't have a number yet, but it's for the needs assessment, the special project that Human Services has taken on for this year. This became one of the goals and one of the mission of the Human Services Commission, and with a new Director of Human Services, we thought that this was really a great project for them to take on and start to move in that type of direction. And we're hoping that from that may come sort of a strategic plan for them going forward on areas that maybe need some of the attention of Human Services Commission. So we thought that this was a very needed and necessary project, and so we committed to adding some budget dollars to that, and that's a significant increase in there. Salary and wage, there was a slight increase in there where we added some monies to the summer employment program. Last year, for the first year, they really got, a number of kids that were involved in the program went up for the first time in a while, and I think we accommodated almost 30 kids last year. So we wanted to adjust the budget a little bit up to be able to accommodate that same number. So the new budget will actually accommodate that number. They were able to cover the extra kids last year through some monies that they get donated for that specific project. So, but we didn't want to take the chance that they wouldn't be able to get those funds, and we wanted to make sure that that project got covered again this year. So they're really doing a lot of good, exciting things in Human Services, and it's reflected obviously in the budget a little bit.
Yeah, Ms. Butler?
A question. On the needs assessment, I thought that was already being undertaken. Is that correct? I mean, did we approve the funding for this at some other point that I'm
We did not have any funding in last year's budget. Some of the preliminary work was done last year.
Right, that's what I
But she
thought we
was
were.
accomplishing that with a volunteer that she has in the office, and was helping work out the plan for the needs assessment. They may have started some of that, the interviewing last year, but I don't think so. I think they waited till the beginning of this year, and actually implementing the whole program started this year. So it'll go against this amount.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any other? Okay, and affordable housing, you unfortunately have some of the summary detail in there, but the other detail I don't have there because it's not part of your current fund. It is a separate utility, so I do have copies if you.
So what page is that? Oh, yeah, okay.
I didn't save one for me. And I'll wait for that to get down, but there's really not much in change in that budget. And for the affordable housing program, a lot of what's in there is under the contractual line item, which is their legal coverage through whether it's doing the purchasing of units back or sales of those and closings, or coverage at their board meetings and the like. It's also contract with Shirley Bishop to do the COA reporting and COA plan. So there's a couple of things in there. They've had some additional work this year, so especially with the consolidation with regards to the work that Shirley Bishop does. So that's why the line item has gone up a little bit in the last couple of years. But other than that, it's pretty much the same. And fees that come in for they're Section 10(3)B fees, they're called, and they're with permits that are taken out for development, and those go to help fund this program. There's also a contribution, though, in your current fund that you raise each year. That contribution is about $100,000. So $100,000 of it comes from current fund budget, and the rest of the balance of it, about $150,000, comes from the fees that come in for the program.
Are there any questions?
And then with regards to capital, there's really just a small request. I think it's in several years out, though, 17 and 18, and that was for the health department and for some vehicle replacement. And we obviously would make sure that, we still have to look at a vehicle replacement plan and see where that fits in for that. Right now, what they do is share a vehicle in the department, and it's one that got redeployed many years ago, and they use that for when they do their inspections around town or if they have another incident or something that they have to go to. So that seems to be working right now. I don't think they're having major problems.
The two of them have just one vehicle?
Yes, I believe so. There's two?
Two vehicles.
Sorry, two.
There were 3 people, but they're 2 vehicles.
Right, okay. And that's it. Really exciting budgets.
Are there any questions on the capital side? No. Do you have questions?
There's no capital requirement for affordable housing after last year?
No, the rest of the affordable housing program that you don't see in that utility budget are the things like where we have units that are owned, and if they don't sell, if the owner's trying to sell and that they don't sell it within, I think it's 3 months, or maybe they've extended that to 6 months now.
I think it's between
Then
six,
there's
between
6 months.
between 6 and 8
Then
months.
there's a commitment that the municipality buys back that unit so that we don't lose the affordable housing designation. And then, we're supposed to fix it up if it needs fixing up, and then resell it to whomever that would qualify for the type of unit that it is. So those are reserves that we've had for years. There's a reserve for actually unit repurchase, and that reserve is used when we have to buy a unit, and it also takes the funds back once we sell the unit. So luckily that's been solvent for all these years, and it was something I think that the township had put in place years ago when they were developing Griggs Farm, and it's worked to really help this program so that you can maintain the affordable housing status, and it doesn't put a drain on your current fund operation.
When that happens, do we have the option of converting it to a rental? Because I think, isn't that the general consensus that we'd prefer rentals to owner?
I think that it's, well, first of all, I think we have looked into that in years past. And there is a way to do it, but there are certain restrictions on it. I'm not sure about the technicalities, but I remember that we got some legal advice a couple years back when we wanted to do that, because in the township, if you recall, we didn't have any rentals, and so, but we did end up going into kind of the rental business for some of the units. But the way that it was done was a whole, put together by the legal team so that we did it properly. And I think we can look at that, whether it's, beneficial to do that. You also have to make sure, again, we'd have to have Shirley Bishop involved to make sure that we had the right mix of numbers of rental units and of owned units or purchased units, because I think that
is
goes
there a
into it,
certain
too.
requirement to have some owners?
I believe
owned?
so. And especially since that was already in the existing plan. So
see.
I'm not sure how that all works, but I do know that you have to take that into consideration.
This will be a big year for that, too, in the fall when we get new numbers, and
Right.
we'll have to see how we fit into that whole new equation.
No, I was just going to say, on the affordable housing part, that there are a lot of people that love the ownership part of it also. There are a lot of renters, but there's a different feeling when you own the unit. And if you own a unit, you have to sell it back to someone else that qualifies for the affordable housing program. And sometimes you can, not make a whole bunch of money, but you can make a few dollars like anyone else would if they own the home.
Yeah, I just remember, that it was generally thought by that the owner, at least it seemed like we had problems, I mean, because you know,
we are...
problems with people qualifying and
Yes.
problems with
That's
people
exactly-
defaulting.
Yeah, well, we do. That's exactly right. And I was sharing with Councilwoman Butler that we have about, I should know, the meeting was just last night, but my mind is gone. I think between 8 and 9 units that maybe 7 units?
I think it's 7 or 8 units.
7 or 8 units
currently.
that we are having, that are for sale. Now, we have hired a specialized realtor to help us move these along, because it's extremely different selling an affordable unit than you would a regular home. But if you know anyone's interested in a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and we have 1 3-bedroom as of this month that's coming on, please let us know. And you can go through Christy Peacock at Affordable Housing. It's a great program. And we're going to be pushing advertising a lot stronger for these units.
Yeah.
That's great. Are there any other questions? I was going to open it up to Scott or members of the public, if anybody else has anything to add or comments. No? Okay. I want to thank all the staff who came tonight to present, and this is the first of 2 budget workshops, and the next one will be next Wednesday on the 16th, same time. And this was useful. Thank you.
I can't wait.
Is there a motion to go into closed session?
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Do we have a closed session?
We have a closed session because there's going to be 4 of us who are meeting, and so that makes it a closed session.
So
And you're one of them.
Yep, okay.
But we thought there were only 3 of us, but somebody else is joining.
That would be me, yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll move that we go into closed session.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?